in to do something as well.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet again's Why Do We Need the Genocide Amendment panel discussion. Firstly, I'd like to give you a little bit of context. Yet Again is a youth-led initiative established by myself and my fellow co-founders Jaya Pathak and Joe Collins. We aim to raise awareness of modern atrocity. Our volunteer writers and researchers explore diverse ranges of topics through both socio-political and legal lenses. We also have an upcoming podcast and YouTube channel where we share visual and audio content. We hope to share knowledge, insights, and our passion for international justice, and we aim to bring about change. You can read more about Yet Again on our website, www.yetagainuk.com, on our social medias at YetAgainUK. And now for the reason we're all here tonight. This month, the House of Commons is due to debate and vote on Amendment 9 to the Trade Bill, the Genocide Amendment. If passed, the amendment would empower the UK High Court to revoke bilateral trade agreements between the UK and a state party where that state party commits genocide. It's for that reason we're here to discuss and gain more information, and with that I'd love to introduce our panel. Firstly, Luke de Pulford, Director of the Arise Foundation, Coordinator of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, Founder of the Coalition of Genocide Response, and a member of the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission. Thanks for joining us, Luke. Nusrat Ghani MP for Wealden, Member of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Select Committee and UK Representative to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you. Rahima Mahmut of the UK campaign group Stop Uyghur Genocide, UK Project Director at World Uyghur Congress, Advisor to the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, and a Uyghur activist and singer. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to pass on to Jaya and Joe for the questions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kirsty. Before we begin, I'd just like to do a little bit of housekeeping. You should have been muted upon entry. If you could remain muted throughout the call, that would be fantastic. We will be taking questions from the audience. So when we do ask you to ask a question, please then unmute yourself to ask it. Luke, I'd like to start with you at the outset of this panel and really get down to the detail. What is the Genocide Amendment?
So the Genocide Amendment is a cross-party, an all-party, in fact, amendment to the Trade Bill. And what it seeks to do is it seeks to establish that genocide determination can be made in a UK court. Now, the Trade Bill has been used as a bit of a hanger for that, because for quite a long time in the House of Lords, there's been something called the Genocide Determination Bill, which has been on the House of Lords Private Members Bill ballot, which for those who don't know, basically means that unless you're in the really top 3 in this ballot, very long list of bills, very unlikely it's ever going to be debated or voted upon. So what you have to do if you're a parliamentary campaigner is try to take the contents of something that you want to do and attach it to a government bill, which guarantees time for debate and vote. That is what has happened with the Genocide Amendment. What you have is the guts of the Genocide Determination Bill, which allows for genocide determination in domestic courts, attached to the Trade Bill. Here's how the mechanism works. Effectively, it says that the UK may not offer a preferential trading tariffs, so it may not offer a trade deal to a country or a state party which is committing genocide. So you've got another party to a trade agreement. If that party is committing genocide, then you may not offer them a trade deal. And if there is one, that trade deal will have to be considered for revocation. In order to know whether or not that party has committed genocide, it creates a mechanism within the UK High Court to determine genocide. So a group that is an affected party, like, for example, the World Uyghur Congress, would be able to bring an application to the court saying, here's the evidence, we think this state party to your trade deal is committing genocide. And then the courts will have to judge it. I want to make a couple of brief points here because I know you want to do some Q&A, but it's pretty important that people understand why this isn't just virtue signaling. UK policy for a very long time has been that genocide determination is a matter for judges, not politicians. This is really old policy. It's positively prehistoric in policy terms. It's at least 40 years that the Foreign Office has been maintaining this. Why? Well, it's because genocide is a crime, and crimes have to be decided in the courts. If we didn't treat it as a crime, you'd end up in a situation where governments would be deciding for ideological reasons or for geopolitical reasons that some state over here might have committed genocide, which could devalue the term and allow it to be appropriated for reasons that it wasn't intended to be used. So, I mean, my personal belief is actually that the UK's policy is about right. The problem is that it doesn't work anymore, because the only avenues to genocide determination are through international courts, which are blocked. They don't work. So the mechanisms are all busted. Nuz will say more about this, I'm sure. I just want to give a brief example. 2015 to 2017, there was a genocide perpetrated upon Yazidis, Christians, and other minorities in Iraq and Syria. There was clear evidence of genocidal intent. You know, ISIS had a publication called The Beak in which they said they wanted to wipe Yazidis from the face of the earth. What happened in that situation? Everybody knew it was a genocide. Even the minister at the time said, I personally believe it's a genocide. What happened? The UK said, it's a matter for the international judicial system. But they knew that it wasn't going to go anywhere, because referring that situation to the ICC would have required referring the situation in Syria, which would mean catching Assad, which means that Russia and China would veto it. So the UK didn't even try. They knew it wouldn't work. They didn't even try. So examine that in the context of Uyghurs and China. Does anybody reasonably believe that we'll get a referral from the UN Security Council to any judicial court, international court? No, China will obviously veto it. They will veto their own accountability. Now, our point here, and the reason we've done this, is that this isn't good enough. It's not what we signed up to when we signed the Genocide Convention. It's not what the Convention Fathers meant when they said that we had to prevent and punish genocide. And it's not what the UK's legal responsibilities are. So this amendment provides a way through that. It doesn't negate the need for the UN or a criminal process, but what it does do is provide a sound legal basis for the UK to act, and we'd be the first country in the world to do it. So right now, I think the UK's policy is that it needs a sound legal basis. The only way of getting that is through courts which will be blocked. The Genocide Amendment gives that sound legal basis, and that's why it needs to be passed. Thanks.
Thank you, Luke. And Nessa, I have a question for you. Why did you and Sir Ian Duncan-Smith choose to lead this campaign?
Thank you so much, Jen. I must also thank Joe for getting me along to this event. Ian Duncan-Smith has been a Member of Parliament a lot longer than I have, but I don't doubt that even though we come across as two different people, we both entered politics to do the right thing, which is to try and use our power in politics to make a difference. And in this situation, the difference we're going to make is not going to be just national, but international. So the step we're asking the UK government to take with our colleagues is an important step, but it's the right step to take. It's very rare that bills pass through the House of Commons and the House of Lords that enables us to tackle something such as genocide. But previously, when genocides have taken place, they've taken place somewhere else that hasn't had a huge connection to this country, but the genocide that is taking place in Xinjiang impacts us right here, right now, which is why Ian and myself are so keen to make sure that we have this amendment passed next Tuesday in the House of Commons. And the reason why it matters, it's not a traditional genocide, if I can even use that term, and I want to be sensitive because Rahima is so close to what is happening in Xinjiang. The genocide that is taking place in Xinjiang is not only destroying the Uyghur people, but before those people are destroyed, it is using their labor to produce goods which are then sold into our country. So we are complicit in the abuse and the atrocities that are taking place against the Uyghur. And that's why Ian and myself are so keen to see this amendment passed through the bill in the House of Commons next Tuesday. Ian and myself are realists, and even though I have huge respect for the United Nations, there is no doubt the United Nations cannot function when it comes to determining genocide, especially with countries that have such strong vetoes. So if we cannot rely on the United Nations, but we hold a national obligation to ensure that we can prevent and investigate a genocide, and we have the most appropriate piece of legislation coming through, it seems like the right place and the right time to get this amendment through. And when we get that amendment through, it enables people that have a case that is strong enough, and this is the vilest of all crimes. So a case that is strong enough to present to courts in the UK for them to investigate. So nothing will happen overnight, but it starts a process of investigation. And if those courts determine that a genocide is taking place, and we have to evaluate that here in the Commons. We're in a unique position this year. We're having to set up our own trade deals and our own foreign policy. We're sort of starting from scratch. We're not relying on the EU anymore. So where are we going to start? Just as we are passionate about the environment and passionate about animal welfare, we should also be passionate about people too. And if we're trading in goods that are procured on the back of slavery, we should be definitely putting down a marker. And if there are two things I can get you to take away when you are lobbying your MPs, that when we talk about genocide, it is the most horrific crime that could take place. And one of the markers is stopping a group of people from continuing their race, as it were. And in Xinjiang, the birth rate has dropped by 85%. That is a marker of genocide. And women who are able to give birth, who are, in that stage in their lives, the Uyghur women are offered either a sterilization or their option is to go to a prison camp and be worked to death. So just think about this. They don't have any control over their fertility. They have no economic independence. They have no rights whatsoever. But we are involved because we are buying items that are procured in Xinjiang and they land up on our supermarket shelves here in the UK. So we are incredibly passionate, not just because we believe that we can set a marker down for other countries to follow, countries like Australia, Canada, America, but because we're not only concerned about the products arriving in this country, but we just don't think they should be produced and the Uyghurs should be abused in the first place. It's very rare in anyone's political career to do something that will be so transformative, not just for the Uyghur, but also for setting a precedent internationally. And we can do that on Tuesday if we have enough parliamentary colleagues walk through the lobby with us and vote for the Genocide Amendment. And I just hope that all of the young people on this call, and Kirsten, it's lovely to see Kirsten here, that they can lobby their members of parliament and ask them how they can look their constituents in the face if they don't walk through the right lobby on Tuesday. I'm happy to answer further questions later on.
Thank you so much, Nus. Now, Rahima, I'd like to turn to you. Ultimately, this amendment has come against the backdrop of the Uyghur genocide. Now, being a member of the Uyghur community yourself and having family still in China, would you be able to explain to those of us on the call that perhaps don't know much about the genocide that's currently going on, and just to provide some context about the persecution against the Uyghur people?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Jaya, both all, the team yet again putting this event together, and it's extremely and timely important. I come from the city of Gulja. I witnessed 1997 Gulja massacre, a peaceful protest crushed, military deployed by the Chinese, the CCP, killing hundreds of people and then mass arrests. The life over there, even before I left in 2000, was already extremely difficult for Uyghurs in every way. But I never even thought that it can be, worsened to this extent. I mean, since 2016, Chen Quanguo, the former party secretary of Tibet, who terrorized Tibet for 5 years and appointed to become the party secretary of my country, East Turkestan, I call it. And since then, the new laws and policies, all very genocidal, was implemented. And I was speaking to one of the camp teachers. She told me just recently, she lives in Holland now. She said, Qalbunur Siddiq, her name, in 2016, there was a notice. All departments everywhere, they notice from the they call it above. So all the Uyghur women must go through this birth control process. And many women just dragged out from their houses for sterilization. I know you must have read about camp survivors, how they were explaining about what happened in camps. But this is just the people who didn't, even before the camp network started. And also the notice was any woman, if they had IUD for birth control in the past, that if they go to hospital to remove it, they must need a letter from the local government, and it has to have 5 different stamps in order for the doctor to remove it. And therefore, most of the women cannot even get this done, and they're suffering. There are people who suffer from the side effect, and they couldn't get it removed. And then from 2017, we know now up to 3 million of Uyghurs in detention camps. This is not just people, not just numbers. These are people, human beings, just like you and like me. And I lost contact with my own family for the last 4 years, and I don't know what happened to them. And a lot of my colleagues, very prominent human rights activists like Rushan Abbas, her sister and aunt were arrested soon after she spoke at one of the US event. And recently she found out his sister, retired doctor, was given 20 years prison sentences. And my president, World Uyghur Congress president, Dolkun Isa, his mother, 78-year-old mother, died in camp. So I can tell you so much unbelievable examples what is happening. You know, over a million children now removed from families, from their own parents, and taken them to so-called the loving kindergarten. Chinese people know, not Chinese people, I'm sorry to say, the CCP know how to name these facilities, and so beautifully, like a vocational training, loving kindergarten, you know. And these other camps, the children's camps, they are not allowed, even the parents were taken away, and the extended families, they are not even allowed to visit these children. The aim is to completely eradicate the cultural identity. So what is happening is absolutely horrific. And we know many, many deaths about the CCP is controlling the camps and the people who dare not to speak to any journalists. So we don't know. People say, well, no large death occurred yet, but we know over 500,000 Uyghur transferred to mainland China in most notorious prisons, and we don't know what happened to them, whether they're going to survive or not. Therefore, it is very important for us, for Uyghurs, to have day in court. We know that the threshold to reach genocide determination is extremely high, but at least we need that opportunity. At least we have a place we can go, and you know, we ask for these perpetrators to be held accountable, and that's the least I think that we should be given. We should have.
Thank you, Rahima. I think that sums up really how important this amendment will be. So, Nusrat, I'd now like to turn to you, conscious that it's coming up to 7 o'clock. But I would like to ask you that there's been much commentary from the government and policy position that the competent courts that can really hear these sorts of cases are international courts and tribunals. Now, you've already mentioned in your first answer about the ineffectiveness of the UN. Would you like to just expand a bit on actually why international courts and tribunals just are possible avenues for cases such as these?
Well, national courts and nations, countries can actually investigate genocide. That has happened elsewhere in the world. I think what is new, Joe, is that we've always relied on the United Nations to do this. And when we've done that in the past, it's never dealt with a genocide that's taking place in real time. And as Rahima has mentioned, because this is so orchestrated, using such modern technology and science, when you're able to reduce the birth rate of the Uyghur people by 85%, we really haven't got time to lose. And every day this genocide continues, you know, where, as I said, we're implicated because we're all involved in buying the items that are being produced. So what is new is that we're doing our own trade policy. And what is new is if this amendment goes through, it does accept that we're relying on our national obligation to prevent and investigate a genocide, and we haven't done that previously, but that obligation has been on our books for many, many decades. And our courts and our judges will use the regular high bar that is always used to investigate such a high crime, because it still has to reach a threshold of genocide. And when the courts make a decision, it's not as if it's going to change anything overnight. It will still require for the House of Commons to deliberate and work out what they're going to do next. It is something new, Joe. I'm not going to deny that. But at the same time, we have an opportunity as we set our trade policy and our foreign policy going forward to put down a marker with the sort of countries we want to work with and the sort of values that we want to promote overseas. And we either start off this year and saying, as we continue with trade deals, that we will barter with the lives of people, as we will do if we continue to negotiate with countries that are involved in genocide. Or we can say, we just don't deal with slavery. We just don't deal with genocidal states. That's not how we're going to trade. Those aren't the way that we're going to exchange goods and money. That's not who we are as a country. So if your MP is concerned that we're going to tie the hands of government or parliament, it definitely will not do that. The courts can only investigate evidence that's put in front of them. They can dismiss cases that they feel aren't legitimate or don't reach the horrific bar of genocide. And nobody is going to be called in front of the courts and be punished, and it's not going to become, great TV to watch. It's a very serious issue that will take many, many months, maybe even years. But what it does do is give confidence to us and confidence to other countries to start investigating genocide, and puts pressure on those countries to change how they are behaving to groups of people. And I hope that Rahima got across to everyone that is listening. What is so chilling about what's happening in Xinjiang is that millions of people are involved. And it's very hard for my constituents or the general public to understand, how can it be that 2 million people are incarcerated? It's something you'd watch in a movie and think this cannot be true, but that is what is happening. It is the scale of the abuse that's taking place and the outcome of the abuse which is going to obliterate the Uyghur people if we don't put an end to this.
Luke, yes, if you want to add something.
Yeah, just 2 brief points. The first is that there is an assumption that the only competent courts here are international courts. The government's position is a bit more nuanced than that. There was a letter from the Foreign Secretary, the current Foreign Secretary, to the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which says this: with regards to determination of genocide, we note that your letter that it has been the government's long-standing policy that any determination of genocide should be made by competent courts. Competent courts include international courts, such as the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, and national criminal courts that meet international standards of due process. So we shouldn't pretend, first of all, that the government even believes that we don't have local courts that are capable of dealing with it. Here's the second thing. 1971, Sir Alec Douglas Hume was the Foreign Secretary, and he was doing some genocide denial back then. And here's what he said: as I think the honourable gentleman knows, they were talking about Pakistan. In the case of genocide, there must first be an accusation, and then that must be dealt with first in the courts of the country concerned. Then it must be dealt with in a court under the auspices of the UN. But no such court has been set up. Therefore, any accusations of genocide fall on barren ground. So the notion that this has always been something in the international realm just isn't true. it's something which has been concocted in the last 20 years because it's very convenient and means that we don't have to do anything.
Thank you. Nus, I do have one last question for you just before you go. Is that one point I did pick up on was this idea that, you know, nothing's going to change overnight if a High Court judge does make a determination of genocide. This wouldn't be, if I'm correct, the first time that Parliament has actually given the judiciary a power to investigate matters and then report back to Parliament, if I'm thinking correctly. Under the Human Rights Act, the court can make a declaration of incompatibility. That would go to Parliament and then they would decide what to do. Wouldn't this really just tie in with sort of that precedent? And the second part of the question is really, what is it, your message now to your colleagues who will be going into those lobbies on Tuesday next week?
Joe, you're absolutely right. I suppose we're in a different space because it's linked into trade and people want to keep things separate. But the point of the principle of what we're trying to do was confirmed when both the International Trade Secretary of State and the Foreign Secretary both spoke about human rights and human rights abuses that they have grave concerns about in Xinjiang. So they've already, as a point of principle, meshed these whole things together. So it is now we are involving courts, we are involving judges, but this amendment, you know, this is the right place to do it. If there's any accusations that this is new and it's not the right place, both those departments have accepted that this is a solid place for this amendment to sit within this bill. I think the message we're trying to get across to colleagues is that MPs have so much on their plate. Everyone's exhausted with dealing with COVID and trying to make sure that we can represent our constituents well. So it can be a big ask to get them to deliberate on something that is so international when everyone's trying to deal with their constituents day in, day out. But it's very rare in one's political career that one can make a long-lasting difference, not just for the way that we conduct trade and foreign policy going forward, but the impact on the lives of the Uyghur and Rahima's family, but also be leaders internationally. There always has to be one country that starts the process off, and even though there are countries like America who's moving tremendously fast on this, we can actually move even faster. Why would we not want to show some bold leadership on an issue as important as this? And we want colleagues to walk through the right lobby supporting this amendment. I think, Joe, the comment I made earlier on about nothing will happen overnight is that I don't want people to be concerned that judges and courts are going to go off and start making decisions how we're going to run government policy. That definitely isn't going to happen. Those are two very separate things. But why would we not allow the High Courts to use all their expertise and for them to judge if this threshold of genocide has been met and report that back to us and also to the United Nations? I think it would be the best thing for us to do as we start flying our flag as the United Kingdom in this new post-Brexit era.
Thank you, Ness. Thank you so much. I'm mindful that it's 7 o'clock. So Ness,
thank you.
I'm
very grateful. Thank you. I think Luke can respond to most of my questions, and always my respect to Rahima. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to open up to a few questions from people in the audience. So I think we have a few. I'm going to head to James Milton if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Hello. Thanks again for the talk. I think it was really interesting points being raised by all the participants. I want to pick up on a point by Luke, which he was talking about the role of national courts in being able to prosecute and determine genocide. And I suppose one of the major problems with proving genocide in international courts is this specific intent clause to do with proving that a state had a specific intent to get rid of, to kill or destroy a particular group of people. And I suppose my question is it realistic that a UK court will be able to have the access to be able to prove this level, this quite high threshold? If I'm looking at, for example, China and the CCP, it's who are incredibly secretive anyway. Is it necessarily realistic that they're going to be able to have the access to prove this high bar? And if not, is the problem itself maybe to do with the threshold itself?
Thanks, James. Interesting question for a number of reasons, and we could talk about it all day. That one important clarification: the Genocide Amendment does not allow for a criminal process. It's not about that. What it allows is for the government to have a solid legal basis to make some kind of declaration, because right now it's not able to do that. So if this amendment passes, you're not going to see Chinese officials being tried in the UK courts and then being convicted and punished. It doesn't provide for that. And if it did, that would violate principles of state immunity and all kinds of problems. So what this does is it provides a middle way. So it doesn't go as far as to allow for a criminal process. Now, your point about intent is an important one, and your point about investigation is an important one. Judges don't investigate. They don't do that anyway. And the judges in the High Court are not going to investigate. What they do is assess evidence presented to them, and that evidence will be argued over and litigated over. So in the case of the Genocide Amendment, what will happen is that the evidence for genocide, let's say it's the World Uyghur Congress, would be presented to the court, and then there would be a contradictor in the court. In fact, two, because this involves a trade deal. So it would be the UK who would have an opportunity to put its case, as would the other state signatory to the trade deal. So that's two contradictors and somebody making an application. So you have an argument going on over existing evidence. So I just want to be clear, like, judges were never going to investigate. That's not what they do. But your point about investigation is a really pertinent one, because China will not allow access to, well, they won't allow any kind of access to any independent observer to try to get a rigorous and impartial view of what's happening on the ground, which is why we have to rely on lots of different evidence. Satellite imagery, for example, or government data. These are the kinds of analyses which have shed light. And then obviously huge numbers of first-hand testimonies, but wouldn't it be great if we could go and investigate? That isn't in prospect. Our argument is that the evidence is strong enough, even without that investigation, to warrant consideration of genocide in the courts. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Luke. Rahima, I'm going to come back to you now, because I think it's really important we understand why this could be such a breakthrough moment for the Uyghur community. Why is it so important that this amendment passes for you and for other Uyghur people? Rahima, you're on mute.
Yeah, good question. As I stated earlier, what is happening, we believe we are facing genocide, and we're desperate because there is no time to wait. That's why the World Uyghur Congress appointed a People's Tribunal, Uyghur Tribunal, to get a determination of what is happening. At the moment, just one, we had a meeting earlier this week. From one organization alone, they received 11,000 words of document. And there's so many expert reports that can also give very, very important information about the scale of what is happening. And these experts are independent scholars who worked in my country for many, many years. They were able to access until even last year. And we have, like Luke already said, the satellite images, and also we had thousands of, not thousands, but hundreds of pages of leaked documents. And we have lucky enough to have some survivors now can explain exactly what is happening inside the camps. And not only this atrocity, not only just happening to those 2 million or 3 million people who are locked up in camps, but this is affecting almost everyone, even those who are not being taken inside. As I said, that the women were herded to the clinics, to hospitals, and forcibly sterilized. And so because of all this, there is a need, because I think Chinese government is doing this so without any concern, without any worry, because they know that there is any legal system can challenge them. You know, and if we have this one, that might be can make a difference. And of course, for us, the government, all governments saying the same thing. When we approach asking them, say that this is genocide, they said, no, this you cannot ask politicians to determine genocide. This is the court has to make a decision. And that's why we feel that the court, it is important. The court, we should have that day in court to make this decision.
Thank you, Rahima. I think that's really powerful as well. And I think that's one thing I want to urge all of you, we'll remind you again at the end of the call, but lobbying your MP is so important because of reasons that Rahima just gave. This is really, it could be a breakthrough moment. So we have to really go all out and do what we can. We've had a few more questions come in. You guys can keep messaging some more questions. I'm going to go to Jonathan from Burst the Bubble. Jonathan, you can unmute and ask the question if you'd like.
Thank you very much, Jen. Thank you, Rahima, and thank you, Luke, for that really interesting and insightful talk. I just wanted to ask on the back of what you were saying about how China obviously has the power to veto anything that would come through the UN. Do you think then that for the future of sort of international human rights abuses, there is no future in terms of using international systems, and we can only look to individual countries like with this bill to sort of respond to international human rights abuses? And if so, what do you think like the impacts of that are going to be?
Who's that to? Is that to me or to Rahima?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, either.
Do you want to answer, Rahima?
No, look, I think you may know better. The question is.
No, I mean, I think it's a fantastic question. It's a tragedy that we're in this situation. I'm a committed internationalist, and I know that Rahima and lots of other people who are working on this are committed to the United Nations. The difficulty is that when you have made solemn legal obligations to prevent people from being wiped out, you can't accept that the only route to that could be through a system that can be blocked by one of the accused countries. It's obviously unacceptable. Now, your question is a sharp one. What does this mean for the international system? I think what it means is that the United Nations has some serious thinking to do. There are a lot of countries for quite a long time who've been talking about the reform of UN Security Council vetoes. It's long overdue. There shouldn't be the possibility for veto when it comes to the determination of atrocity crimes. It's an absurdity that that is even the case right now. And I would hope that we could rescue the international system by having some reform of international veto power. I think that's probably the best way of answering it. But you're making a really good point. We can't allow ourselves to become unilateral about this. It needs to be international wherever possible. But it is extremely difficult for the reasons outlined, unacceptably difficult, which is why we're trying to find a middle way.
Thank you, Jonathan. I hope that answers your question. Rahima, do you have anything you'd like to add, or should we move on to the next question?
I don't have anything.
Yeah. Awesome. So we have one more question from Amma. Amma, you can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thanks for the conversation that we've had. It's been really helpful and insightful. Other than the proposed amendment which you've discussed, in what other ways would you propose that the UK change its relationship with China to combat the situation? I'm not sure who'd be best poised to answer it, but if either of you have a shot.
I can say first, I'm sure regarding policy, Luke can answer better, but we are seeking also Magnitsky sanctions. This is so important because US has already sanctioned many officials and also some entities. which is responsible for building camps, managing camps like Xinjiang Production Cooperation Corps, and also the Public Security Bureau, for example. Individuals like Chen Quanguo, Zhu Hailun, these people from all these leaked documents, also from personal testimonies, we have more than sufficient evidence. And therefore, we feel that this kind of clear and targeted sanctions is very, very important. Of course, trade is important to, to restrict trade, but individual sanctions, when we have this Magnitsky Act that they can use, we know that, in Belarus case, they did come up so quickly. And so, but, we are still waiting. 4 years we've been waiting. And at least one country, the US, already sanctioned these people. It was already published on internet and recently added more names. And so they're doing much, much better than UK and many other countries. And that's why we are asking why you cannot do the same, at least.
Thank you so much. Now, I have a question for both of you. So on Tuesday, this is what the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab had to say, and I'll quote, "It will frankly be absurd for any government to wait for the human rights situation in a country to reach the level of genocide, which is the most egregious international crime, before halting free trade agreement negotiations." Now, what would your response to that be? And in particular, what would you say to MPs?
There's a pretty simple answer to that, which is that we've just signed a trade deal with Turkey. And a lot of people feel that with a lot of evidence, in fact, there's a group of coalition of organizations who've been working on the Yazidi genocide for some time, who believe that Turkey's incursion of Syria may well make them an accomplice to genocide, which renders them vulnerable. So I think the simple answer is, well, actually, mate, you've just signed a trade deal with a country which may well be engaged in mass atrocity crimes. Sorry. And I think the second point, probably more pertinent, is that it's a totally spurious argument. If we really cared about human rights due diligence in our trade deals, then we'd actually have some. There is no legislation requiring human rights due diligence to be implemented. So, of course, we would hope that the UK wouldn't be in a situation they'd be trading with a genocidal country, but it's happened before, may well be happening now, possibly with Turkey. We're pretty sure it can happen again. So it's a disingenuous argument. I don't think he even meant it, as you could probably see, because I think after about the third time of saying it not being received very well in the Commons, he didn't say it again after that. Yeah, I don't know if Rahima wants to add anything, but that to me would be the knockdown.
Yeah, completely agree. I completely agree with Luke. If you really mean what you said, that then at least this determination, you should care about to offer this mechanism instead of refusing or blocking. So I think it is important that human rights should always be the number one priority. When I left my country in 2000, leaving my son 5 years old behind and not knowing whether I can bring him over, I had a big hopes that, that I might be able to change a lot of things. And I couldn't. For the last 21 year now, almost. It's very, very sad. A lot of my friends, colleagues in the same situation sacrificed so much. Like earlier I said, the president of World Over Congress, Dr. Issa, he left in late 90s and never went back. He's banned from entering Turkey because of the agreement between China and Turkey. And, lost his mother, two of his brothers, one professor, mathematics professor in Xinjiang University, imprisoned, I think is 20 years or something, purely just a revenge of what he's doing in a free country. And these family members has nothing to do with all this, and they get punished. So people are really paying high price and hoping, the countries, democratic countries, that can take some action and counter China. And that's why I think MPs should really support this. Think about people like me and like many millions of Uyghurs who are suffering. At least this is some kind of comfort. It's not when you compare the scale of the abuse and the scale of the suffering. And this is actually not the final kind of solution, but at least something that gives us hope, and we feel that there is some kind of justice in this world.
Thank you, Rahima. And I'm going to put this question to both of you. Luke has something really interesting to mention about this. The government recently put measures in place in reference to Uyghur slave labour. Do these measures make the amendment redundant? Are they related in any way?
No, mainly because most of the measures had already been announced. Joe, the inside track on this is that the government knows that they're in trouble with our amendment. They know that they've got a big rebellion coming. And in fact, they know that even more after today, after what the Board of Deputies did. And a little bit of insider information, there was an emergency briefing that the Minister for Asia, Nigel Adams, held with MPs to try to tell them, oh no, you don't want to be voting for this amendment, which went really badly for him, because MPs are not happy to have to vote against this measure. So there's some positive stuff there. But the inside track on those announcements is that they bundled those together, tried to chuck them out to make MPs feel like the government was getting tough on China, so they didn't need to vote for this thing. Because just a little bit of information for those who perhaps don't know much about the parliamentary process, or perhaps don't know many MPs, and I know a lot of you do, it is hard to get people to rebel. They don't want to do it, not on a 3-line whip, certainly not if they are new members of parliament, as many of these Tories are. So to get them to do it is quite a big thing, and it doesn't take much to dissuade them. So there's a reshuffle which is coming up. Some of them might get a job. That can be enough to dissuade some of them. There is also, unfortunately, there have been a number of rebellions recently, and it makes it hard to rebel again, because this is about, basically Muslims in China for them, whereas the COVID stuff is right in their constituency, closing businesses in their constituency. Much easier for them to rebel against government on that than something which is very far away. So all of these things were packaged together to make it easier to throw them something. So they didn't feel that it was so easy to rebel against the government. So those packages were old. Now, the thing about supply chain transparency and the requirements of the Modern Slavery Act, it's a complex area of policy. Basically, if you are a business with a turnover of more than £36 million, you are required to produce a modern slavery statement. Huawei has a modern slavery statement, so does Hikvision, 2 companies which are knee-deep in what is happening in Western China. Those modern slavery statements don't tell the truth, but there won't be any fines for them under the new government's rules. The reason being that the fines are just for people who don't produce the statements. That's all it's for. It's not whether or not the statement is false, it's whether or not they produce it. So no, it won't have an effect in any big way. The US has just banned all cotton and tomatoes from the area. That is going to have an effect, a massive deleterious effect on the economy of the area, and bring China to the table. What the UK has done is tiny. And I think Rahima could add to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I agree with everything, every words you said. Another thing also, I lived there, and I know what the system is like. You know, everything is based on lies. It's not based on facts. And we even worry that how we can detect the products is come from that region. You know, it's so easy for them even change the label, change you know, there's just it's almost impossible to do any kind of due diligence in China, let alone in my country. So in every level, it's the criminality of the CCP is just beyond your imagination.
Thank you both. I've had another question come in. I'm going to go to Jack Street from Demographica. Jack, you can unmute the question.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thanks to the panel and to everyone from Yet Again for putting this on. I really appreciate it, and all the hard work that you've been doing. As somebody who runs a youth-led media outlet, I'm conscious not only of how many youth-led organisations are leading the way in taking a stand against the CCP, but also the role of the media in telling the truth and holding those responsible to account. How does the panel think the media have handled reporting the genocide so far, and discussing in particular the importance of this amendment?
I'm really sorry, I actually missed the last bit of the question. Something went on with my internet. Could I ask that to be repeated, or perhaps somebody just summarize?
Sure, yeah. I just asked, how does the panel think the media have handled the reporting of the genocide so far, and the discussion of this amendment in particular?
Rahima, I think that one better taken by you.
I mean, report about the genocide. What can I say? It's not enough. It's not enough. The reason being, when I spoke to the journalists from BBC and from Sky News and many other media, the reporters, they just said, "Oh, because we are unable to access to the region, we are always need a new story to so we can report." But the problem is, it is extremely to get anything new. But whenever there is some new information and we are reporting, in a way, it's that is the situation. Unlike any other countries, even like a war zone, you know, normally the journalist can go there and report from inside. But in China, it's just impossible. Impossible. This is one of the kind of barriers that, you know, or why this is not in the news every day as well. But there are, and might be many other reasons, but this is one of the very important reasons. And regarding how the media actually reporting about this Genocide Amendment bill, is that your second question? So maybe Luke know better on this one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always difficult to get something like this in the media, because what they're interested in is the possibility of a government defeat. But you've got to prove that it's likely going to be a government defeat, which is not an easy thing to do. So by way of example, you know, we won this in the House of Lords by 126 votes. It's a massive majority, still barely made a splash. So next week, you'll find that people will wake up, probably Monday, when they realize that this thing stands a good chance. But there's a lot of media over the weekend. Look, I'd say that journalists have not been seeking to write this story. We've had to work very hard to get stuff in the press and make sure that the story is still ticking over. If, for example, tomorrow there'll be an important letter in the Telegraph from some senators saying that we should get this done. There'll be another letter, which I can't tell you about, in a couple of days. There may well be a big breaking news story about Uyghurs early in the week, and lots of op-eds from the people involved, the MPs involved. So it's pretty hard work, to be honest. We need all the help we can get. And if there's stuff that you can do to drop this into the bloodstream even more, that would be profoundly helpful. We really need the final push now.
Thank you. Just keeping an eye on the time, I'll do this as one last question in a two-parter, and this is to both of you. First, obviously, we've mentioned MPs will be going into the lobbies on Tuesday. What is your message to them? And the second part, which is to everybody here and watching this event, what is it they can do to support this campaign?
So my message is vote for this bill, and that can make a huge difference for Uyghurs. I know this bill is not just for Uyghurs, but at the moment, especially what is happening in my country. And therefore it is important.
Yeah, I'd add a couple of things if I may. First of all, do not accept a weasel-worded standard letter from your MP. If it comes back saying, oh, the government's done loads of stuff, we led a letter of 36 nations at the United Nations, blah, 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 and it all sounds really good, and you're thinking, oh, I got a really nice letter there from an MP, you know, letter-headed, it's nice and signed. If it doesn't say, I will vote for the amendment, reject it and go back to them and say, how are you going to vote? That's what we need. And by the way, if you can feed in answers that you get, that's also really helpful to us for number crunching purposes. Do not just accept that letter, go back to them, asking them how they're going to vote. You need to hold their feet to the fire. They need to feel this pressure. And if they say, I can't vote for it, then you say, well, then I can't vote for you. That's what you need to be doing. And the more people that you can get to do that, the better. Use your communities, churches, mosques, whatever. Get as many people together as possible and show the strength of the community in favour of this amendment. You haven't got much time now, but this really is a final push. We're getting close. We're getting close. So we need your help to get this over the edge. So anything you can do, throw everything at it. Ask them how they're going to vote. Let us know, and yeah, and keep raising awareness beyond this vote about what's happening.
Thank you, and I think we'll close it there. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to both you, Rahima, you, Luke, for not just attending tonight, but your fantastic efforts over the last however many months to try and get this amendment passed. I can only imagine how tired you are, especially in these last few days as the vote comes nearer. To everybody that has come tonight, thank you. If you go to our website, Kirsty's just put a link in the chat box. We have a whole page dedicated to the campaign for this amendment. You can find out all the information you need to know and exactly how to write to your MP, where to find them and what to say. So please do visit our website, have a look at how you can get involved. We've got just over 5 days left, so this is the last push now, and each and every one of you could be the difference in this amendment passing. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to all of you, and until next time, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.